This is a story about the forgotten architect of the woke consensus on race, a long-lost godfather of the orthodoxy enforced by America's elite institutions. His name is Stokely Carmichael. You might not know who he is, but you definitely know his ideas.
Liberal congressmen got up the other day on television and they said
Stokely Carmichael was a civil rights wunderkind. Barely out of his teens, he worked closely with Martin Luther King and rocketed to international fame after uttering this fateful phrase.
Black power! We want black power! What do you want?
What does that mean? Well, that's exactly the question that caused him to split from MLK.
Well, let me say first that this march is non-violent.
Mr. Carmichael, are you as committed to the nonviolent approach as Dr. King is?
No, I'm not.
In order for nonviolence to work, your opponent must have a conscience. The United States has none.
A Marxist-Leninist, Stokely helps found the Black Panther Party and seemed destined to become an icon, the swaggering, militant alternative to MLK's hopeless naivete.
That I'm not gonna beg the white man for anything that I deserve. I'm gonna take it.
He's even anointed the next Malcolm X by the New York Times. But then, all of a sudden, he vanishes. Stokely moves to Africa and virtually disappears from American politics. He names himself after a couple vicious tin pot dictators and spends the rest of his life trying to establish a continent-wide communist ethnostate. And he ends his life in conspiracy-drenched irrelevance.
You think the FBI may have given you this cancer?
I'm certain they did. I'm certain they did. Indians could get smallpox from blankets by osmosis. They'd be able to give us cancer with laser beams today.
Before Stokely left America, he engineered a unique idea. A little drop of intellectual arsenic that's permanently poisoned our politics.
The major enemy is the hunky and his institutions of racism. That's the major enemy. That is the major enemy.
There it is, on the very first page of his manifesto. It's a good description of Jim Crow, redlining, poll taxes. These are institutions of racism. But Stokely's definition was more expansive, writing that institutional racism is less overt, far more subtle, less identifiable in terms of specific individuals committing the act. Stokely invents racism without racists.
Institutional racism attributes negative outcomes in African-American life to this force, this implacable force that's out there. Racism, over which nobody has any control.
Institutional racism.
Institutional racism.
And institutional racism.
Starting with Stokely Carmichael, institutional racism means institutions that are complicit in producing disparate outcomes according to race. So that means that if fewer black people X than whites, then the institution in question is racist.
What you're also doing is removing any responsibility for or agency over those outcomes from the hands of African Americans. So calling mass incarceration expression of institutional racism, was it the legislature that made the law that was racist? Was it the police officers that are enforcing the law? Was this the courts that were adjudicating claims of having broken the law? Identifying the racists who are responsible. I want to know exactly what you're talking about, and people don't tell me that. They often don't tell me that.
And blaming some free-floating oppressive force has a perverse effect. The architect of Black power becomes the architect of Black powerlessness.
African Americans are then reduced to bobbles at the end of a string that's being pulled by powerful white people somewhere behind the curtain. It seems to me that it invites a kind of complacency, a kind of infantilization. And here's the irony of the ironies. The very people in this situation who are agents are the racists. And the politics of the institutional racism monger reduced to making moral appeals to racists to stop being racist.
Stokely Carmichael crashed into the civil rights movement and permanently set it on a new trajectory. Martin Luther King framed his fight as getting America to live up to its own ideals.
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper.
For Stokely, America's ideals are a sham, a thin camouflage for its true purpose, a grand white supremacist conspiracy.
This country is racist from top to bottom, from right to left.
This is a country that has been defined by foundational, systemic, endemic racism.
And for black people to become a part of that is for them to become, in fact, anti-black and to hate themselves.
MLK wanted to transcend race, seeing it as a cosmically obscene source of division.
God is not interested merely in the freedom of black men and brown men and yellow men, but God is interested in the freedom of the whole human race. Black supremacy is as dangerous as white supremacy.
Stokely didn't reject racism, he flipped it.
So you tell them they better be happy with Dr. King. Because when some of us get guns, we know who we gonna kill. The white race, wherever they have gone, they have ruled, conquered, murdered, and plagued. Whether they are the majority or the minority, they always rule. They always rule.
Because this is just another example of white privilege, using your white privilege, and what are you gonna do with it other than come into this space and take?
The second black leaders start putting their fists in the air and chanting black power, the civil rights movement goes off into the deep end.
A balled up fist is not a jobs program. It's not decent housing. Laws are made by majority vote. You must persuade the other guys. Otherwise you don't get what you want.
Those other people produced results in the world that we live in. The people afterward were on stage. And there's a difference.
Stokely's gift to America, the corruption of the civil rights movement, a new kind of wokeness that sees whiteness and blackness as these forces locked in eternal combat, with leaders that don't solve people's problems, they just make careers off of them.
And the tragedy is that that way of looking at things has been seen in educated circles as the central way of being enlightened and black. Stokely is smiling, definitely.